Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our Quick Publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hi everyone, I'm Mo Chatra, and welcome to another episode of Money Talks. And I've got an absolutely packed agenda to discuss a lot of big topics at a time when Liverpool finds itself in a real sliding doors moment, a moment which really will in many ways change the course of this club over the coming years. And depending on the outcome of some of the items that we will be discussing, that the club could be in for some amazing times or some altogether very different times. And who better to discuss these topics with than a man that is not short of an opinion or two, but also understands the game, both in terms of what goes on the pitch as well as off the pitch, as good as anyone. It is the one and the only Dave Hendrick. How are you doing, Dave?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah. Not too bad. Just enjoying this lovely weather that we're all experiencing. And I'm also glad that the World Cup is coming to an end this weekend as we record this, and we'll be back to having some domestic football to enjoy before long. So yeah, all fun and games.
Yeah, it will be nice. Number one, it'll be nice to see the ground rather than the sheet of frost and other nastiness that's all over the place. And with the Premier League and such coming back, it'll be nice, for me anyway, on Two-Footed to have, actual content to talk about rather than having to make it up as I go every day for 6 weeks, which is what has been the case. But no, I thought this would be fun to do today because obviously we did the transfer committee pod recently, and obviously a big topic to come up on that was our finances and the ownership and can we afford the players we want. So I thought, what better way to talk about that in more detail than for us to get together and do this? Yeah,
totally, absolutely. And I think we're about 6 and a bit weeks on now since the news broke. David Ornstein of The Athletic was the first one to break the news that FSG were exploring the possibility of selling either a stake or the club outright to other investors. And this was the first time that news had broke publicly about FSG potentially being open to an outright sale, even though, as I've touched on this podcast over the last few years, privately they have been open to a sale. And the truth is that, not long since they bought the club, they have always been open to a sale. They bought it as an investment of 300 million. And if somebody was to come along, say 2 years after they took over in 2012 and offered them, say, 1.5 billion, even at that point, it'd be foolish to think that they wouldn't have accepted an offer of that magnitude. So, that is something that, they've always been open to, but they have become even more open to a potential outright sale to other outside investors. And what we will do, Dave, is we'll talk about what that could mean for the club in terms of, all the different aspects, such as, what funds might be available for transfers and whatnot. But the way I look at it, there are a few different outcomes here. There is the potential, clearly, for no sale to occur and for the status quo to remain if FSG don't receive anything that they think is worthy of either an outright sale or a minority sale in terms of a share of the club, then they might just carry on and think, okay, let's give it a couple of years and then see what the market's like then. The next thing might be sale of a minority investment, maybe 10, 20, 30%, who knows. Then there's a possibility of an outright sale to owners that might look to operate the club in pretty much the same way as FSG, which is for the club to be entirely self-sustaining, i.e. no owner investment into the club, or what some have deemed or termed FSG Max, which is the FSG model, but with some owner investment into the club. So if the manager wants to make a signing of a really high-profile young player, and the selling club is looking for the bulk of the transfer fee to be paid up front, and the club's finances don't allow for that, then the owner or owners might be willing to put that money up. And then the final outcome, I think, is potentially a sale to either an individual or a group who have unimaginable wealth, who are potentially in the ballpark in terms of resources to compete with the owners of Newcastle United, PSG, Manchester City. But obviously with that comes other considerations, other issues as well. So of all of those different outcomes then, Dave, at this point in time, what do you think might be the most likely outcome?
I do think they want to sell outright. I think the talk of, we might hold on to it, we might just do minority investment, to me, that seems like posturing.
Yeah.
That seems very much like, we're not desperate for the cash, so unless you're going to pay us our asking price or close to it, we're not going to budge. I believe they want to sell, and I believe they want to sell for a very specific reason. If we think back to when they sold, was it 10% of the FSG group to Redbird Capital, that money, the reason for that sale was to enable them to go and buy the Pittsburgh Penguins. Yes. And add that enterprise to their portfolio. Well, right now there's talks going on at the NBA regarding the potential for expansion. And there are two cities that have sort of been, in truth, there are three cities that have been tagged as the potential expansion destinations. The likelihood is that there would be two expansion franchises, both in the Western Conference, meaning two Western teams would move to the East, probably Minnesota and Memphis, but that's neither here nor there. The three areas would be Seattle, who once had the Supersonics, who got bought and moved to Oklahoma. Seattle has a ready-made fan base. It has an arena. It has history. It has a name. You walk in, it's ready-made day one, and you just run with it. The others would be Las Vegas, and we've seen in recent years Las Vegas get an NHL expansion, the Las Vegas Golden Knights, and we've seen the NFL move to Vegas. The Oakland Raiders became the Las Vegas Raiders. And the third one is Mexico City. And the NBA have been trialing games in Mexico City for a number of years. They've just put a G League, which is their development league. They've put a G League team down there to see how it goes. There's huge interest in it. There's huge wealth behind the push for a Mexican team. Now, if there's a Mexican team, people like Carlos Slim are already in situ and already kind of ready to go and invest and take over. But the others, so if we get a Mexican team and an American team, Seattle, I believe, will go to local investors. But Vegas is where FSG come in. If a team goes to Vegas, it's likely to be driven by Fenway Sports Group. That's the franchise they've long been linked with.
Yep.
In partnership with LeBron James. And LeBron James has spoken quite openly about wanting to own a franchise in Vegas. The other thing that might have kicked this into gear, though, is that Robert Sarver, the owner of the Phoenix Suns, has been investigated and found to have acted improperly towards staff, both towards women, towards people of color, and there's a variety of different complaints made against him, and basically the NBA have told him, you need to go, and he has agreed that he will sell his stake in the Phoenix Suns. The Phoenix Suns are one of the marquee franchises because it's Phoenix, it's Arizona, it's a place where a lot of players live in the off-season. It's a very attractive destination for players to go. And FSG have been linked to the potential of buying Robert Sarver's share. Now, Robert Sarver is believed to be looking for about $2.2 billion for his share. Now, he doesn't own the whole franchise. The franchise was recently valued at around $4 billion based on the trends of NBA sales in recent years. His would come to about $2.2 billion, and that is where FSG would need the money.
Right, okay. Interesting. And on top of that, there have also been strong rumours that Fenway have been exploring the possibility of buying into an NFL franchise.
Yes, the Washington Commanders, formerly the Washington Redskins.
Yeah.
Their owner is also an absolutely appalling human being by the name of Dan Snyder, who, like Robert Sarver, there's been years and years of allegations about how he treats people, about his behavior, about the language that he uses. And it's a little bit tougher for them to force him out because there hasn't been the length of the type of investigation that there has been with Sarver in the NBA. But there's been enough done to show that he's not a suitable person to own an NBA franchise. But the issue here is he's quite a powerful person in NFL circles, and he does have the backing of some of the other owners. And we've had one case where Jim Irsay, who owns the Indianapolis Colts, he came out and said it's possible that we could look to, remove, because the owners own the NFL and the owners own the NBA. The commissioner is just the commissioner. It's the owners that are the power holders here. But the other owners would have to vote him out. And the belief is that people are afraid to speak up against Schneider because Schneider's the type of guy who will hold dirt on others and he might expose them. So it's a little bit tricky to get rid of him. Now, there's also the factor that there are other immensely wealthy people interested in buying the Washington football team, which the Commanders is a stupid name. The Washington football team, one of which is a group that involves Jay-Z and a couple of other high-profile people like that. So that's the NFL franchise that the FSG have been linked to. I think the NBA is an easier path for them, but the NFL is where you really want to be because that's the real money spinning league. Like that's the league where you'll make enormous amounts each and every year. And unlike the NFL, there isn't a collective bargaining agreement that states you have to give 50% of all basketball related earnings to the players. So in the NBA, every penny that's earned from basketball related activities, so TV revenue, sponsorship revenue, ticket sales, all of that gets put into a pot and is split 50-50 between owner and players. And for the players, it's basically what they can earn in terms of salary. The NFL is slightly different. Their salary cap works slightly differently. It's not as, I think it's like 40% goes to the players, 60% goes to the owners. And the owners in the NFL make more per annum than the owners in the NBA.
Right. So very lucrative, therefore, either league for owners, in stark contrast to the Premier League, where by and large owners, if anything, tend to put money into their clubs rather than the other way around. The Glazers being largely exceptions to the rule, whereby they, as we know, take dividends out of Manchester United, and we'll come back to the Glazers and United later on. The other area of investment that we know FSG are looking to spend money on, raise funds for indeed, is something called Fenway Corners, and that's again something I've mentioned here on Money Talks. This is a 2 million square foot development. It's real estate. It's an area around Fenway Park in Boston, which would be a multi-purpose development, including office space, retail, housing accommodation, public realm, etc. And again, that is not going to come cheap. And they obviously will not look to fund it entirely themselves. They will look to bring in other investors as part of a consortium to deliver this project. So this is a project that's already gone through planning, and it's a very, very ambitious project. But again, as I say, this is not going to come cheap. So
no.
In between spending on that, as well as either an NBA or an NFL franchise, there is clearly a need for funds. So I agree with you completely. And any suggestions in the media that that they're happy to just, if anything, sell a minority stake in the club, I think is just posturing, like you. I think it's just them sending a message that, look, any offers that have come in thus far aren't meeting our expectations. If you want to take the club outright from us, raise your offers. So I think that's the kind of game that's being played at the moment. And that's exactly the kind of message that I'd expect them to put out publicly through the media.
Of course. Like the Fenway Corners project, I believe, is going to cost about $2 billion, and it'll take between 5 and 7 years to complete. So that's going to be a big outlay for them, and they don't have that kind of cash to hand. So again, I would imagine if they could sell us, you'd see a sizable portion of the money go to that, and a sizable portion go towards some other investment.
Absolutely. And then the final thing is that, discontent with Fenway is not just exclusive to this side of the pond when it comes to certain sections of the Liverpool fan base. Even fans of the Red Sox have been getting increasingly irate with FSG in the last year or two over a perceived lack of investment over there when it comes to that baseball franchise. So again, there is an increasing clamour for them to start putting their hands in their pocket or finding some means by which to invest more into the Red Sox as well.
Yeah. Now, it is worth pointing out that there are no more entitled group of fans anywhere in the world than Boston sports fans, be it the Red Sox, be it the Celtics, be it the Bruins or the Patriots. The Patriots have won 6 Super Bowls. They've had a couple of down years, and their fans are whinging and crying. The Red Sox, it is worth remembering, since FSG bought the Boston Red Sox, they are the most successful franchise in Major League Baseball. They have won 4 World Series. The San Francisco Giants have won 3.
Yeah.
I think the Cardinals have won 2, and the Houston Astros have won 2, including the most recent one. The New York Yankees, who spend all the money in the world, they've won 1. The New York Mets, who spend all the money in the world, they've won 0. The LA Dodgers, who spend recklessly, they've won 1. So their model has worked, and baseball is the type of sport where you do go through cycles, and it's very easy to go from worst to first. You'll see teams be bad for a number of years. Like, for example, the Houston Astros were absolutely awful for a period of time as they bottomed out, stacked up draft picks, cleared off their cap sheet, and put themselves in a position that as their young players started to develop, they could go out and get high-profile top-level players. Like, they got Justin Verlander at one point, who was one of the best pitchers in baseball. He's now gone to the Mets, but they got what they wanted from him. They got a World Series from him, and Boston have done the same thing a couple of times where they've sort of dropped off for a couple of years and then rebuilt and come back and won. The big complaint with Red Sox fans is they allowed Mookie Betts to go. Mookie Betts is probably the best position player, so non-pitcher, that the Red Sox have had in I don't know, 40, 50, 50 years, maybe longer. But Mookie Betts is 30 years of age. He was 27, pushing 28 when they let him leave. He's a smaller player, and smaller players who are power hitters don't tend to hold up all that well. Now, he's also an incredible defensive player, it's worth pointing out. But he went to the Dodgers, and the Dodgers signed him to a 12-year, $365 million contract that is going to pay him up until the age of 40.
Right.
The Red Sox did not want to commit to paying him $30 million a year to the age of 40. And for me, I think that's smart business practice, because the likelihood is that contract, based on the history of these types of contracts in Major League Baseball, that contract is going to be a very painful thing to pay out on in the last 4 to 5 years. And the Red Sox have had some big swings in free agency in the last decade. And when they've gone wrong, it's cost them a lot to get off those players. So they signed Carl Crawford from the Tampa Bay Rays to a 7-year, I think it was $120 million deal. And it didn't work. And they signed Adrian Gonzalez, I think from the San Diego Padres, to a similarly big deal. To get rid of those two players, they had to give up really good assets, really good young players to send them away. So they're very cautious since those type of deals on not committing huge salary. They also had, is it Pablo Sandoval? They paid big money to in free agency. He didn't work. Hanley Ramirez didn't work out. So they're very cautious when it comes to giving out big long-term contracts, because, like I said, the cost of getting off those contracts is prohibitive. So this year they've lost Xander Bogaerts, another homegrown player, another absolute star, one of the better players in Major League Baseball. He has gone to the San Diego Padres. But again, it's a 11-year, $280 million contract. So you're talking about, he's 30. When he's 41, he's going to be earning $26 million or something a year. And that's just not something the Red Sox want to get themselves into. Because the other side of this is they may someday decide to sell the Red Sox. And a Red Sox franchise loaded with bad long-term contracts like that is a less appealing thing for somebody to buy, because when you buy, you've already got this headache of, what do we do with these contracts? So I get why Red Sox fans in recent years have been complaining, but at the same time, you've won 4 World Series. You hadn't won for 90 plus years before they took over. So shush. And the Liverpool fans choosing to find the odd tweet by a Red Sox fan as some sort of weird one-up on FSG, like, oh, look, I found this evidence that these don't like either. Like, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't follow American sports. And I would beg anybody who wants to talk about baseball to actually know about baseball, know about the league, know about the trends, know about these contracts, and know about the success that they've had. Look, there's loads of reasons for us to hammer FSG, loads of them. But their stewardship of the Red Sox is not one of them, because they're the most successful team. It would be like us turning around and saying,
are you that person who has everything? The coolest merch and those must-have fan threads? Well, over at our Anfield Index shop, we've gone that extra mile when it comes to pimping up your Liverpool collection. From our popular range of bespoke design t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies and hats, to our signature edition mugs, prints and coasters, all provided with fast worldwide shipping. We have something for every red. We also stock official LFC merchandise and are licensed with the Premier League and UEFA to sell official iron-on shirt badges and sleeve patches. As a listener to this podcast, you can get 10% off everything with coupon code AIPRO10. Just head over to AnfieldIndex.shop or find us on Etsy by searching for Anfield Index.
Jesus, Real Madrid are having a bad year. Should have, like, say Real Madrid finish third next year, this season, and go out of the Champions League in the quarterfinal or whatever, or out to us in the next round. Be like us turning around and going, what a joke of a club. Look at the state of them. Oh, they've won how many Champions Leagues in the last 10 years?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know, like, you've got to factor in, yes, they've had a number of down years, but they've won 4 World Series, and that's the be-all and end-all. They're the most successful franchise in baseball over the last 20 years.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, obviously, over the last 6 and a bit weeks since the news first emerged, all manner of different individuals or groups have been linked with takeover of Liverpool Football Club. Now, one of these groups, which is a group that you on Twitter have been advocating for, is HBSE, Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment. These are the individual. This is the group, the consortium that currently has I think it's a majority stake in Crystal Palace, and they also own the Philadelphia 76ers as well as the New Jersey Devils. So what is it about this group then, Dave, that you think would make them perhaps the ideal or the better fit amongst those that have been linked to the club thus far?
Okay, so just to be clear, it's a minority stake they have in Palace, not a majority. So it's easy for them to get rid of that stake.
Right.
So here's the thing with David Blitzer and Josh Harris are the two main entities behind this. So David Blitzer owns Brøndby, part of Palace, Augsburg, Alcorcon, ADO Den Haag, and Real Salt Lake, and there is another club that he owns. So he would bring a multi-club model to the club, which is something we've always talked about wanting, is something similar to what the City Football Group have. A network of clubs where we can, A, send players on loan, or B, we can buy players through from South America or whatever if we want to give them, a proving ground in Europe. And then we can get favourable terms to bring them to Liverpool. So you could set one of those clubs, let's say Augsburg, because they're in the Bundesliga. Let's say you treat them as your Red Bull Salzburg. And we are your Red Bull Leipzig. So that's the proving ground. And if it works out, we buy you off them for, whatever. And it's also a way around FFP, of course, as well. We're not having all that kind of outlay. These other clubs can be used in that regard. But you've got very beneficial loans as well that you can send out. So if a player like, let's say Musalowski, the young Polish winger, well, he needs a proving ground. So why not send him to Brøndby, which Denmark has become quite a hotbed for developing talent in recent years with Midtjylland and Nordsjælland and Copenhagen. So why not send them there? If there's a young English player we'd like to maybe see him get first team minutes a level above the Championship but below the Premier League. Oh, well, why not send them to Augsburg? Tyler Morton, you've had a great season at Blackburn. We don't think you're quite ready for the Premier League, but you could go and play for Augsburg for a year, and we'll see where you stand after that. So that's the first thing. I really like the idea of a multi-club model. When I look at what they've done with the Philadelphia 76ers, they tore the place down and they rebuilt it. And they rebuilt it into one of the best teams in the NBA. They did that by appointing Sam Hinkie and going through an analytics approach, which is obviously what we would like to do. They had what they called, or what they termed, the process, which is we're going to be as bad as possible for a couple of years. We're going to get all the high draft picks, and we're going to build a great team. Now, they weren't the ones making the final decision when it came to who to draft. So the fact that the Sixers made a couple of mistakes, I don't think is their fault, but other people might disagree. Joe Connors is a Sixers fan. He might disagree, but I would look at it and say you should have drafted, say, Brandon Ingram over Ben Simmons, and you should have just held on to the third pick and took Tatum instead of Marcel Fultz. So I think they've done a pretty good job with the Sixers, turning them into a perennial contender. They spend a significant amount of money. They're always one of the highest paying luxury tax teams. They've got ambition to go and get the best players. So when James Harden became available, they went and they made that move to bring him in. When Daryl Morey, who's probably the most highly regarded general manager in the NBA after Masai Ujiri. When he was looking for an out from Houston, it was them who stepped in and said, well, come and run our franchise. So they value analytics, which is why they've gone with Sam Hinkie and they've gone with Daryl Morey. So that fits with what we want. We want that analytics-based approach. They bring a multi-club model. They bring, I believe, ambition. If you look at the New Jersey Devils as well, they're also paying high salary. They haven't had great success there. And I would say the one area that they need to improve on is they need to improve on the people they appoint to run certain areas of their franchises. But coming into Liverpool, you've already got Jurgen Klopp in situ. You're looking for a new sporting director. That may well be done and decided before anyone else takes over anyway. So that might take all that headache out of it. But I think they bring ambition, they bring a willingness to spend, they bring a desire to win, and they bring that multi-club model. Now, a lot of people have rushed to tell lies about these people because they don't want another American.
Mm.
And what they've done is they've created these fantasy worlds about these people. So they've gone on Crystal Palace message boards and found posts from 3 and 4 years ago, like a handful of them, not loads, a handful of them, criticizing these owners. What they fail to realize is that the financial situation at Crystal Palace dictated that Crystal Palace couldn't do a whole lot. But look at what Palace have done in the last couple of years. Look at how they've turned their squad over. Look at the investment in youth. Look at the new academy. Look at the investment in analytics. And look how improved they are. And look how more modern they are under Patrick Vieira. And that has been driven by David Blitzer. So for those Palace fans, firstly, those posts are from years ago. But secondly, Harris and Blitzer have only really taken on a more hands-on approach in the last couple of years. What they've also done is they've termed HSBE as a hedge fund. It's not a hedge fund. It's nothing like a hedge fund. It's just a vehicle to purchase assets. It's what it is. It's an ownership model. Yeah. So that's a lie as well, that it's a hedge fund. Then they want to turn around and say, oh, they don't have the money. HSBE only has X amount of cash on hand. Right. That's operating cash for the enterprises overseen by that group. So then they say, oh, well, it would be a leveraged buyout. But that's a complete lie, because the history of Harris and Blitzer shows they don't do leveraged buyouts. They just don't do leveraged buyouts, nor do they need to, because they have their own personal wealth first and foremost, which is a combined in and around 10 billion net worth. But also you have to remember who's behind them. So when Todd Boehly bought Chelsea, Todd Boehly didn't buy Chelsea. Todd Boehly was the face so that Clearlake Capital could come in and buy Chelsea. Well, who are David Blitzer and Josh Harris? Well, David Blitzer is a senior executive at the Blackstone Group, which are a private equity firm. And they have annual revenue of about 22.5 billion. They have total assets of about 41 billion. Josh Harris is one of the founding partners of Apollo Global. Apollo Global have total assets under management of about 30 billion. These are investment firms. That's where the money would come from. It would not come from a leveraged buyout. It would be these type of groups funding Josh Harris and David Blitzer. That's where the money would come from. It would be a similar type of buy to how Todd Boehly bought Chelsea, except I would imagine Harris and Blitzer would actually put in a bit more of their own money. Boehly didn't put in a whole lot of his own because he didn't have a whole lot of his own to put in, because it's all invested in the Dodgers and the Lakers and a few other places. So the lies about these individuals has really wound me up over the last while, because they're such blatant lies and they're so easily disproved. But when morons put them out on social media, they immediately get hundreds of likes, and people take that information and think, well, that's the truth. So I've seen people like tweets about leveraged buyouts, and then I've seen them go into other threads on Twitter and say, oh, it'd be a leverage buyout, and repeat verbatim what they've read elsewhere, when there's no evidence it will be a leverage buyout. In fact, all the evidence points to it not being a leverage buyout, because that's not how these guys operate.
Right, interesting. And, you know, with the Chelsea ownership as well, just last year in 2021, this is Crystal Palace, they did sell 40% of their stake to an individual called John Textor. So he's another individual, another American businessman that entered the fold. So I don't believe he's part of that group, but he works with them. So do you think there's any possibility that he might also join with Blitzer and Harris to move over to Liverpool?
Yeah, it's very possible. And there's a few other people that could be. So John Textor is also the owner of Botafogo. I think that's the other club that Blitzer's involved in, is Botafogo in Brazil. He also owns a club in Belgium called RWD Molenbeek. Now, David Blitzer, like I mentioned, also one of his clubs is Real Salt Lake, and he owns Real Salt Lake with a guy called Ryan Smith, another very wealthy man who also owns the Utah Jazz. So it's very possible that they could get the likes of John Textor, the likes of Ryan Smith involved in this, because they all have existing business relationships. They're all very close. This wouldn't be a thing like with, say, Hicks and Gillette, who didn't really know each other all that well and kind of got put together by a puppet master. Like, oh, I'll take your money and we'll go and we'll do this. These guys already have existing long-term relationships. So, yeah, I do think that that Textor and Ryan Smith are, and I said at the time, when this first got announced, I did a Daily Red, and Harris and Blitzer were the group I mentioned, and I said, watch out for Ryan Smith's name to come up in this as well. I didn't think of David Textor at the time, but he would certainly make sense, and I think he is the type of man who would like to be involved in this. He seems to have a real interest in football. And that's the thing here as well, is these aren't like FSG when they first came in, where they've got no knowledge of anything. They're not like Hicks and Gillette, who didn't know what football was. These are guys who have worked in football and have a track record in other sport as well. And that can be of big help when it comes to growing the reputation of the club. You know, doing partnerships with the Sixers, the Utah Jazz, the Devils, whoever. So, yeah, I think this type of group would be your FSG plus. I think they would be similarly analytics driven, but more ambitious and more willing to go that extra mile when it's needed. And that, I think that, like, we've spoken about this before, Mo, like, we've never wanted anyone to come in and spend Man City type of money. All we were ever asking for was, like, maybe every second year there's like another 30 million for a player. You know, ideally every year maybe there's one more player in that kind of 25 to 30 million pound range who can come in and add to what we have, because our issue has been, since we won the European Cup, we've always left ourselves short going into the following season. Yeah, and if we had somebody who could just make up that shortfall, we'd have so much more success.
Well, you know, I mean, I've posted on Twitter over the last several months with certain criticisms of the ownership, one of which has been that, in my view, there's been a lack of investment in the squad since, well, post-2018. So 2016 to 2018, we all know the club spent extremely well. And not only that, they spent a lot of money to boot. So that was great. But after that, there seemed to be a change of tack that, okay, look, we've got a very good squad now, so we don't need to be spending a lot of money. And let this squad do as much as it can, and then let's take stock at a later point in time. And so we've had successive summers now where, in my view, again, there has been not enough spend. And I'm not saying that we should have gone out and spent money on 5 or 6 players every summer. Of course not. But even one additional quality, young, exciting prospects each summer, 2019, 2020, 21, and this past summer, 4 players, as you mentioned earlier, about 25, maybe 30 million. That would not have broken the bank. That would have been feasible and achievable. And with that, 4 players who may have come in. So even if you go back to signing a 20-year-old, 21-year-old back in the summer of 2019, 3.5 years on, that player would now be 24, 23, 24, coming into the prime years of that player's career. And ideally would have been a midfielder as well. And it would have meant that the likes of somebody like Jordan Henderson would have not played anywhere near as many minutes as he did this season. And somebody like James Milner would not even be at the club anymore. And yet here we are, where we've got an aging and an aged midfield. And that has been one of the biggest areas of weakness for us this season. All of that can be avoided just by literally a single additional decent signing each summer over the last 4 summers. And
yeah, but I mean, it's not just that. I mean, look at the other areas. Joel Matip is 31, Virgil's 31, Bobby's 31, Mo is 30. We've got quite an old team, and we held on to players for too long. Like we went into a situation where we had Sadio, Mo, and Bobby all entering the last year of their contract together. How was that allowed to happen? How was one of them not sold 2 years ago? I know there was COVID, but there was still opportunity to sell Sadio Mane for a significant fee. In the end, we got pennies for him. Now, he hasn't done great since going to Bayern, but 2 years ago, we would have got off the back of winning the title. When he was the best player in the league, we could have got 100 million for him. There's no way we couldn't.
Easily. Yeah.
Bobby would have brought a good fee a couple of years ago. We let Gini Wijnaldum, Emre Can, Albi Moreno all run down their contracts. That was
Daniel Sturridge, I think.
Daniel Sturridge. Now you're looking at Naby Keita and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. Like, all combined, that's probably 200 million worth of investment. Now, I know it's all been with amortization, it's all been sort of written off, so their value, their book value is nothing. But that's not good squad management at all. How were these players allowed? Like Lovren, how was he allowed to stay so long? He was garbage. Why did we keep him so long? Lallana, another one that we wasted 25 million on, and he was allowed to stick around for 6 years and leave on a free. Like, how was this allowed to happen?
And that's where I think it's really interesting how the Moneyball stroke analytics driven approach to squad management seems to have been eroded over the last several years, because I can't believe that if we were operating in a completely objective analytics driven way in terms of squad management, that some of those players would have stayed as long as they have, and then we wouldn't have invested enough, and therefore left us in a position where, by the end of the season, close to half of the first team squad will be 29 or over. I just don't think that would have been possible if the model was being applied completely and utterly in the way it was meant to have been. And I think that is also part of the reason why Michael Edwards is no longer at the club.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's 2 main reasons why Michael Edwards left the club, and I think it's because he was having to fight on both sides. He was having to fight with the people above him, and he was having to fight with somebody who technically, though not in reality, is below him in the pecking order of the company, or in terms of the line of management. He was having to argue with Klopp over certain things, and he was having to fight with the owners over the lack of funding, because there's no other way that this would have been allowed to happen. That and one of the reasons Klopp has had to cling on to certain players who he deems reliable or he likes to have around is because he hasn't had the opportunity to replace them. He's tried, he has tried to replace them, but there's been, unfortunate circumstances like Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain's knee injury, Naby Keita's persistent muscle injuries. These have hurt us as well, but these players should have been sold 2 years ago. They shouldn't still be at the club. As much as I love Naby and we're a much better team when Naby plays, why is he still at the club? Like, why is he still at the club? Why is Ox still here?
Mm.
I can't imagine that these lads wouldn't rather be playing regularly somewhere. But, you know, when I hear Klopp say things like, well, I can't just tell players to leave. Yes, you can. And you know you can because you've done it before, both at Liverpool and at Dortmund. What you're saying is you can't tell them to leave because you don't think you're going to be allowed to replace them.
Mm.
Do you know?
Yeah. And that, you know, is part of the reason why I have been more critical of the owners in the last couple of years, because I think that at a time when we were in a position of strength, you know, we should have built on that success. We should have really put everything in place to ensure that this squad was going to be exceptionally strong for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years, which again, through proper management of the squad over the last 3.5 years, in my view, was absolutely achievable. I just can't believe that it was financially not possible to have done more than we have done. I just can't accept that. And one of the things that, you know, I give as an example is the fact that we spent 56 million in club revenue on the Access training facility. Now, we as a club had the opportunity to, for example, just spread that cost out over a number of years, which may have only cost, you know, 5, 6, 7 million, rather than 56 million over the course of about 15, 18 months. And again, some of that money could have gone in towards investment into the squad. So, you know, there are ways and means by which the club could have operated in a different way. Well, but again,
this is where I think the ownership, like, this is one of the things when I talk about lack of ambition, like, between the two stands, the main and the Annie Road and the AXA, what's the total cost that we're spending?
So it's coming up towards £250 million.
Right. So obviously the main stand is done a long time now at this point. It was in work before Jurgen took over. But the other two, they've been done since we won the European Cup, right? So what are we saying, about 150 million between the Anfield Road and the AXA?
Yeah, that's right. However, even with the main stand, it was a loan that FSG took out. It wasn't their money. It was money that...
No, that's exactly it. But what my point is, the club are paying for these, not the owners.
Yeah, correct.
But the FFP and profit and loss guidelines allow for the owners to pay for them, not the club. So the owners could have just paid for them. Hello, I'm here to annoy you. I'm here to annoy you into listening to more of me and more of others on EPL Index. We don't just have the Anfield Index stuff. We've got EPL Index as well, which covers the entirety of the Premier League. And we have 3 podcasts and a whole bunch of really good writing on EPLindex.com. The podcasts are my own Two-Footed podcast, which is every day at 4 p.m, Monday through Friday, covering the whole league. We have A Tad Predictable, hosted by Tadiwa. You know Tadiwa, he does Anfield Index. He presents A Tad Predictable before every Premier League match week. And then Kevin De Vries and his crew on the EPL Roundtable, they're every week after the Premier League match week. So make sure you listen to everything we're doing on EPL Index and follow us there on Twitter at EPL Index. Thank you. Bye-bye. And use the money that the club ended up having to spend on them on players. Now, wouldn't 150 million over the last couple of years have gone a long way towards fixing the issues in the squad? And the owners could have just paid for them. Like, this is my biggest gripe with them, is that all of these things, the AXA, the main stand, the Annie Road, yeah, they're great for the fans, they're great for the club. But what they're mostly great for is the value of the club. So the owners have used the club's money to raise the value of their asset. The club aren't getting that money back. When they sell, they're not going to say, oh, well, here's your share. They're going to say, thanks a million, good luck. They've used the club's money that should have gone towards improving the team to improve the value of their asset. And that's what bothers me more than anything. It's great that we have a training ground, though. Let's not forget, while the AXA is very, very good, it was the cheapest way to do it. While the Anfield Road looks like it'll be very good, it was the cheapest way to do it, and the main stand was the cheapest way to do it. So it's not like they've gone and gotten us the very best of the best. Leicester City's training ground, for example, is more highly thought of than our training ground.
And their owner spent more than double.
Yes, and he spent that money, not the club. He spent that money out of his pocket. When Roman built Chelsea's training ground, he spent the money. You know, what we've done is we followed the Arsenal model. And look what happened to them. When the club started paying for assets that the club didn't own because the owner owned them and the owner would sell them with the club, that's where they got into trouble. So this is my main gripe with FSG is like, I understand that you wanted to improve the value of your club, but that should have been your investment, your money, not ours. Because our money should have gone towards improving our team. Your money should have gone towards improving your asset. And like it's the difference between one league title and one Champions League, or potentially 2 league titles and 3 Champions Leagues over the last couple of years. Because nobody will convince me we weren't the best team in Europe last season. We were better than Real Madrid. We were better than Man City. We lost out on both because we didn't have enough investment in our midfield. And people can deny it all. They went, oh, we got to every single game. Yeah, we didn't win. We would have won the league title last year with a better midfield. We would have won the European Cup final with a better midfield. And in the pandemic hit season where we won the league title, the European Cup was wide open, as it was the following season. A very average Chelsea team won the European Cup, but we didn't have any centre-backs that year. The year before, we had Adrian in goal for a major Champions League game. And this lack of investment has cost us multiple major honours. And that is where that money could have gone, and the owners could have funded the structures and the infrastructure of the club, and the money the club was earning itself, that should have gone towards buying players.
Yeah, definitely preaching to the converted here. That's again a criticism I have levelled against FSG over the last couple of years, in that that there certainly seems to have been a bit of a case of falling asleep at the wheel, admiring the work that you've achieved, but perhaps if it's been through the labour of others. And, that is a dangerous pitfall, not only in football, but in any form of competitive sports, that, as soon as you have a team that is exceptional, the last thing you do is stop and admire how great it is, because tomorrow it can be a very different story. So that again,
when we won the European Cup in 2019, we were the best team in Europe, and our opportunity was right there to put our foot in everybody's throat, and enter an era of dominance, and we haven't done it. I know we won the league title the following year, and that for many people was enough to win one league title, but I don't know what club those people support, but they don't support the same club I grew up supporting, where second place is the bad years, where when you're second, you're nowhere. That's the club I grew up with. That's the club that Bill Shankly, Bob Paisley, Kenny Dalglish, and others built. This idea of, one league title in 30 years and we should all bow down and thank you. No, absolutely not. Like this is where we needed to be more ruthless and more aggressive and more ambitious. And we won a European Cup and spent 4 million on 2 kids. We spent 4 million on 2 kids.
Yeah, and that summer, I remember it well, and you will as well. We had a pre-season tour of the US. It was, I think, the International Champions Cup. Is that what it was called?
Yeah,
I
think so.
We played. Was it Sporting Lisbon? Bruno Fernández used to play for them, and when Jurgen Klopp really rates a player and he embraces an opposition player in a certain way. That's what he was doing to Bruno. I very much felt that he was keen on Bruno at that time, but clearly that deal never materialised. And that was an ideal time to bring in a player of that ilk, even if it wasn't Bruno. But Bruno was available, and obviously just a few months later, he headed off to United instead. And, that was at a time when United looked like they were completely out of the running for top four. Bruno single-handedly turned their fortunes around and scraped top four for United, and single-handedly
and then carried them to second the next year.
Completely, yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Just one last thing on John Textor that I omitted earlier on. He also owns Olympic Lyon.
Wow.
So he's a fairly major player now in world football with a major club in Brazil, although they're in a down spell at the moment, not because of him. It was before he took over, and he owns Lyon now. He finalized that purchase, I believe, earlier this year.
Right.
So, it's he's definitely someone that could be involved in that sort of group with Harris and Blitzer and Smith and maybe those four with the backing of Apollo and Blackstone.
Yeah.
I just obviously what some people want is they want City type ownership. Now, I can see the merit in it, of course I can, but at the same time, we know that a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, I'll not support the club." Now, most of those people are lying, and most of those people, when it comes down to it, will still continue to support the club. They might do it from afar, as opposed to going to games, but they will continue to support the club because the club means too much to them.
Yep.
But those type of regime ownerships, like the Qataris, the Saudis, I'm not necessarily in favor of one of them myself. If we could find a mega rich individual from the Middle East, I'd have absolutely no problem with it.
Yeah.
But the problem is most of those mega rich individuals from the Middle East tend to have quite strong connections to those regimes and often are dictated to by those regimes. But for me, I was looking at, realistic scenario. I think FSG will look to sell to another American group, and we're seeing a growing collection of American owners in the Premier League. There's just been another one now with Bournemouth being bought, funnily enough, by the guy who owns the Las Vegas Golden Knights. So this is kind of the trend right now, is that a lot of Americans are putting the money into the Premier League. And that's just what I expect to happen, is that's how this turns out, is that we get more American owners. And I think you don't just judge them on their nationality, though. You have to judge them on the individual merits of the people and their track records. And I think the track record of Harrison Blitzer is pretty good. So that's why I'd be on board.
Okay. And, you touched upon, other parts of the world where investment could come from. And again, a strong link has been made in terms of a potential consortium between individuals or investors from Saudi and Qatar. And up until not long ago, the two countries were, not only economically and diplomatically, but in other ways, at complete loggerheads. So, there's been a thawing of that frosty relationship in more recent times, and they seem to be cooperating more closely than they have been in the past. But as we know, with Middle Eastern foreign policy, it can be turbulent, and tomorrow again, those relationships could be fraught. So that concern in terms of any potential coming together of investors from Qatar and Saudi, even though obviously the expectation would be that in terms of owner investment, that would be the one that would potentially bring the most. Though again, what you don't want is that to come with owners who try to influence decision making in terms of recruitment. And we are seeing some of that with Chelsea. So even though Bowley is the front man for that group, he does seem to be getting perhaps a bit too heavily involved in recruitment decisions. Certainly made a major play to try and bring in Ronaldo last summer, and that failed. But even with some of the other recruitment decisions that Chelsea have made, longer term, you wouldn't look at them and think that was smart decision making, like Aubameyang, for example. So that would certainly be a concern, is that if owners with incredible wealth do come in, that's all well and good. But if they try to influence decision making when they're not really in a position to do so, that could be very counterproductive. But we'll certainly keep an eye on that situation as it develops. It is unlikely, though, that any announcements about deals agreed in principle or anything of that nature come this side of Christmas. We're probably looking at January, February at the earliest before any significant movement does occur, and then it could be into the spring, even in the summer before the sale completes, and that's if it does. All to play for when it comes to that situation. Now, on the subject of ownership, our biggest rivals in Manchester United, they were put up for sale very shortly after Fenway's interest in potentially selling the club outright went public. And, again, that is a sliding doors moment for Liverpool Football Club, because if United end up being taken over by individuals with incredible wealth and are potentially on a similar footing to a Manchester City and a Newcastle, then in terms of Liverpool's position and its ability to compete for the major honours, potentially could be adversely affected by that. However, what we do know is that whereas it is reported that Liverpool are potentially up for sale for something in the region of about £3 billion, it is believed that the Glazers, are looking for a much higher figure, potentially 6 or 7. So again, with that, Dave, what do you see as a likely outcome from that situation?
Do we actually think Manchester United are really for sale? When they're asking for 6 or 7 billion, and that also comes with an enormous debt of 580 million or something on top of that.
Yeah.
And then you factor in that their training ground is extremely outdated at Carrington and hasn't been touched since the 90s, since they moved from the Cliff to Carrington. They haven't done any upgrades on it. Old Trafford is badly in need of enormous renovation, which is probably another 600 million pound project. You're really looking for somebody. Let's say they look for 6.5 billion, plus you've got to walk in and clear the debt, so that's 7 billion. You've got to fix up the stadium, that's 7.5. You've got to do the training ground. You're looking at about 7.6 billion in total. Yeah. Manchester United Football Club is not worth 7.6 billion pounds to anybody. It just isn't.
Well, its revenue for last season looks like it would have been slightly below that of Liverpool.
Yes.
So if Liverpool is worth 3 billion, then how is United, whose turnover now is pretty much on a level pegging with Liverpool, worth double that? It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense at all. And if we look at even something as simple as the Forbes valuation, Forbes valued Liverpool at 3.6 billion in May of this year. That's pounds.
Yeah.
They value Manchester United at $4.6 billion around the same time, which at that point was about 3.7 billion pounds. So they valued Manchester United about 100 million more than Liverpool. And yet the Manchester United ownership group think they can get double what the club is worth. My actual belief is that if the Glazers got the offer for that kind of money, they would, of course, grab it with both hands and run. But I don't necessarily believe they're actually looking to sell the club, because that club is a cash cow for them, because they milk millions and millions out of it every year. And whenever they fancy just making a little bit more, they do one of those weird share sales things where they convert some of their shares and basically split them and sell them off and pocket the money while retaining complete control of the club. I don't believe Manchester United Football Club is actually for sale. I think this is more, they're putting it out there that if somebody wants to give them a ludicrous sum, they'll take it. But otherwise, I think this is just a distraction method to take the fans' eyes. Look how happy United fans are. Remember the last time they were this happy? It was when they signed Cristiano Ronaldo. Yeah. The time before that, it was when they signed Paul Pogba. This is what United do. They go, look at the shiny thing over here, and while all the fans are gazing at the shiny thing, they're doing something untoward in the other direction. I don't believe United are genuinely for sale. Not at that price. Now, if they were to come down to 4.5 to 5 billion, maybe. But Jim Ratcliffe has been quite open about the fact that he tried to buy the club. Now, Jim Ratcliffe is a fairly intelligent man. He's a nasty Tory and a Brexiteer, but he's a fairly intelligent man.
Yeah.
But he's not paying no 7 billion for United. He's not taking on that debt, and he's not going to pay for a new stadium on top of it. And by the way, the 500 million is a renovation. If United decide to build a new stadium, you're talking well over $1 billion. Nobody's taken on to do that. Nobody's going to be that stupid. Like, you could spend all that money, do up the stadium, do up the training ground, and then get the club valued and realize you've spent 2 billion more on your asset than it's actually worth. Even with the new, like a fancy upgraded stadium and a new training ground and the team performing better, the likelihood of United being worth 7.5 billion anytime soon is just completely unrealistic. So, like, I could see in 10 years that they might be worth 6, 7, but not 7.5. And that's in 10 years. So you're taking on to own the club beyond that, plus all the investment you're going to have to make along the way. It's just not going to happen. I don't believe they're actually for sale. I think they're kicking the tires, but I think it's more a distraction method than anything else.
Yeah, and again, it'll be interesting to see how that all pans out. It is reported that there is interest in them. I mean, some of the reports have been completely ludicrous. And
the stuff about Apple and Facebook and Amazon, these companies aren't going to buy a football club. Like, let's not. If they're going to buy a sporting enterprise, they're going to buy an American one. If Jeff Bezos is going to buy something, he might buy that Seattle-based NBA franchise that I mentioned. He might buy the Portland Trailblazers, something like that. Facebook, the same. They might look to buy, I don't know, the Sacramento Kings or something. They're not going to come and buy a Premier League club for that kind of fee. And just, we mentioned the likelihood of a Middle Eastern investor and those the kind of regime buys, because United fans are all excited about some reports that the Qataris might sell PSG and buy United or Liverpool. Let's be really honest here. They're looking for 4 billion apparently for PSG. PSG are not worth 4 billion. They're not worth half of 4 billion. When those type of ownership groups, your Abu Dhabi, your Qatar, and your Saudi Arabia, when they go to buy a club, they're looking for a club that is low value with growth potential. They're not looking for the finished article. They're also looking for fan bases that have had no real success to cheer on. If they can find a fan base that's had more relegations than trophies over a 50-year period, that's where they'll go, because those people are easier to sports wash. There's a reason the Saudis bought Newcastle and a reason Abu Dhabi bought Manchester City, because those were clubs with big potential, but they were not successful clubs. They were not high-value clubs. I think Saudi paid 350. I think Abu Dhabi paid about 280 for City. Like that's the type of price point they're looking at. If Qatar wanted to buy into the Premier League, they're more likely to look at a Wolves or a Nottingham Forest or a Sunderland, as an example, than they are at a Liverpool, a Man United, an Arsenal. Like, there's a reason none of those groups were involved in trying to buy Chelsea, because that's not the model of club that they buy. They buy clubs where, when they have success, they're the reason for success, and they're lauded as the bringers of success. And people go, they did what in their own country? Oh, well, we don't care. No, we won an FA Cup over here. That's what they do. That's where their model works. And like I said, PSG are not worth 4 billion. They're just not. Like, you could buy every club in France, and I don't just mean in the top flight. You could buy every club in France for 4 billion. The league's not worth that much. The TV revenue is minuscule. So, nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, even if with PSG, if you look at their turnover, yes, it's very high, but that's largely because the bulk of their sponsorship comes from Qatar. So if you strip all of that money out, the actual revenue that's generated by legitimate means is probably less than a couple hundred million, probably a lot less than that. And even
City, like if you were to buy City, all of the revenue goes away as well, because it's all fake. It's all fake revenue.
Completely. Right. So just a couple of quick topics to cover before we conclude, Dave. One of which, returning back to Liverpool, is that we have seen over the last few weeks a number of departures. So just in the past day or two, we've seen the partnerships manager move on. So this is a chap called Ed Rice. And just prior to that, again, in the last several weeks, we've seen announcements that the likes of Julian Ward, who replaced Michael Edwards, he's resigned and he's leaving in the summer. Ian Graham, who has had a very prominent role in terms of the analytics side, also is going in the summer. And it's expected that there'll be other departures from that area as well. So, Dave, what is going on?
Ian Graham's. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go for it. Go.
Ian Graham is, I would say, the third most important person in terms of the success that we've had after Jurgen and Michael Edwards, and his departure does worry me. That is a point of concern. Now, there are obviously people within the club who've worked very closely with him and in his department, and maybe one of them is ready to step up, someone like Will Spearman, but we don't know if he's going to stay at the club. He might well leave as well.
Yeah.
Now, Julian Ward, I'm not overly concerned about, because I don't know if Julian Ward is good at his job, because we don't really have any evidence to suggest that he is or isn't. Julian Ward was given the job when Edwards left, and in truth, it was the wrong decision, both in hindsight because he's leaving a year later, but at the time I said I don't know that this is the right decision as well. You can go back and listen to it in our archives. I said, I don't know that we're doing this the right way. Shouldn't we be doing some sort of external recruitment on this? Shouldn't we be looking around Europe to see is there a better candidate for this role? You're not talking about replacing Damien Comolli here. You're talking about replacing Michael Edwards, who's the best in the business at what he does. And Julian Ward, yes, he had done well as he was in charge of looking after the loans. He was promoted to assistant sporting director, but he was only assistant sporting director for about 6 months before Edwards let the club know he was leaving. So I didn't think Ward was the right person anyway.
Yeah, and it was reported that he didn't want the job as well.
Yeah, he probably didn't feel he was ready for it.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't, and that's not his fault. And I'm sure he'll go somewhere else and he'll be very, very good at whatever it is he lands with next. There will be clubs that line up to bring him in because he's a very smart man and he is good at what he does, but what he does isn't the sporting director position. So, like, even Michael Edwards, he had to sort of build that role up and up and up. Like, remember, he was technical director first, and then he was given more responsibility, and then he became, he was head of analytics, I think, or head of something to do with research to begin with. Then he became technical director. So his step up was more marginal, whereas for Ward, it was your loan manager, and now within 6 months, you're going to be the sporting director. So get ready. So I'm not overly concerned about Ward leaving. I am obviously concerned about who we might appoint to replace him. There are great candidates out there. I think one person that stands out as someone that we should probably be kicking the tires on is Christoph Freund, the Red Bull Salzburg sporting director, who has done an immense job since being there. So I think he's definitely someone. Michael Zorc, I think, is worth a look. We've seen links to Sven Mislintat in recent times. Mislintat's a great scout, but he's not a sporting director. I haven't been impressed by him as a sporting director. But if you brought him in under Michael Zorc and put him in charge of recruitment, then I think that would be a great role for him. But then what do you do with Dave Fallows and Barry Hunter? Rumours are they might both leave as well, so we'll have to wait and see. But Zorc has that existing relationship with Klopp. Most importantly, he has Klopp's respect, which I think makes it a bit easier for them to work together. Another name that's worth considering is Paul Mitchell, currently the Monaco sporting director. He has done some good work. He was at Sunderland. No, that's not Sunderland. He was at Southampton. He helped build kind of the team that was there under Pochettino. He was involved in the recruitment there. He went to Spurs with Pochettino. He didn't like how things were operated and that Daniel Levy had so much of a say in things. That he said himself that was his dream job, but it turned out to be a nightmare. He ends up going to Red Bull Salzburg, was important there. Then he went to Monaco, and he's done a pretty good job at Monaco. He's done quite well with some sales, and he's made some good signings. There's some iffy signings as well, but he's not working with the kind of resources he'd have here in terms of who would work with him. He doesn't have the same level of analytics, scouting that he would have here. So another name that's come up recently is that of Cristiano Giuntoli, who is the Napoli sporting director. Now, his contract is up in 2024. He's been at Napoli for 9 years. He's done a very good job. And obviously, this past summer, he put together maybe one of the best transfer windows anyone has ever seen. So, he's a name worthy of consideration. And one other name I'd throw out there is Caminero, who is the former sporting director of Atletico Madrid, and he did a very good job at Atletico Madrid, building the first and second great Simeone teams. Not the most recent team, which obviously hasn't been very good, but he built kind of everything I think 2019 he left, which is the same summer that basically all their players left and got sold, and Simeone had the rug swept out from underneath them. So there are people out there. Obviously, the other one to mention here would be Luis Campos, who is at Paris Saint-Germain. Now, his current title at Paris Saint-Germain is football advisor. So he's not the sporting director. He's a football advisor. And I believe he's working not just with PSG, but with one or two other clubs as well. Kind of like a freelance sporting director, if you will. So he's contracted to them rather than under contract with them. So he's an incredible talent scout. He built the Monaco team that won. Well, first of all, he built the Monaco team that won the league there, which is Falcao, Matinho, James was gone. Fabinho, Thomas Lemar, he discovered Mbappe. It was like that team. He built that team. Then he went to Lille and he built a team that won the league there as well. So he's phenomenally good as a talent spotter. He's phenomenally good as a recruiter. He would probably be my top choice,
right,
just based on track record. But Christoph Freund is brilliant as well. So either of those two, and I'm chuffed. But
right. Just with Freund,
Ian Graham is going to be tough to replace. That's what I'm saying. I think sporting director is probably easier for us to go and get a good one. Ian Graham, I don't know who you get. Like Ted Knutson, I don't know that he's going to. You'd have to convince him to sell StatsBomb. Do you know, like that's the level of person you're looking for.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, we know Ian Graham's a super genius, and so are various members of his team. And I don't know if maybe one of his team potentially could step up into that role. But again, it is quite a significant, sizable gap, and we've already seen that there have been gaps in commercial, in the medical department, and there's been a lot of turnover of key personnel over the last 12 months. Certainly, it's not something you would expect of a club that is said to be as well run as Liverpool. So, there perhaps are underlying things there which are going on, which are causing this level of turnover. But just quickly before we move on from that sporting director role, somebody you've been a big fan of over the years, Monchi. Do you think he would?
No, the mojo's gone. The mojo's gone. No, he was incredible in his first run there. Went to Roma, it didn't work. He went back, and it worked for a time, but the last couple of years have just been. They've just not been great. Look, he is a genius, and he's brilliant at what he does. I kind of feel like he needs a break from football. Like he's been doing that job for a long, long time, and always at clubs where it's more frenetic than a normal club. Like Sevilla are always in financial problems because their ownership are just an atrocity. Yeah. They're always in financial trouble. And when he went to Roma, they were in a weird situation as well, where they had new owners, but the owners didn't really know what they were doing, and they had a couple of odd summers, and it was all a little bit strange. He is brilliant. There's no doubt he is brilliant at what he does, but I kind of feel like he either needs to stay at Sevilla forever, or he just needs to take a break before he goes somewhere else.
That's fair enough. But yeah, again, going to be very interesting in terms of what the club does of filling these positions, and it may be looking to potentially wait if a sale is going to materialise, or is likely to materialise over the next several months. The club may feel that it's better to hold on and just manage with what they have until new ownership comes in and they can decide who to fill certain key positions with. But again, some big decisions to make on that front too. Now, finally, Dave, we have a transfer window coming up.
Just before we go to that, we obviously saw the news that came out in the Echo yesterday that there's another departure from the club, which is Ed Rice, whose title, according to this article in the Echo call him. The line is, Liverpool have seen another departure from behind the scenes as Ed Rice has left his role as partnerships manager at Liverpool. Okay, so partnerships manager. And I saw loads of people use this as an excuse to have a big tantrum on Twitter yesterday. Now, firstly, I was yesterday years old before I'd ever heard Ed Rice's name. Now, no disrespect to him, I'm sure he's good at his job. I've been on Wikipedia this morning, and I want to give you some names. Laura Murphy, Elizabeth Adams, Stacey Howells, Darryl Page, Rachel Butler, David Evans, Jack Best, Louisa Buchanan, right? Louisa Buchanan is partnerships manager at Liverpool. Jack Best, partnerships manager at Liverpool. David Evans, partnerships manager at Liverpool. Rachel Butler, partnerships manager at Liverpool. Darryl Page, senior executive, partnerships at Liverpool. Stacey Howells, senior executive, partnerships at Liverpool. Elizabeth Adams, partnerships operation manager at Liverpool. Laura Murphy, partnerships manager at Liverpool. And Jonathan Kane, vice president, global partnerships at Liverpool Football Club. Never heard of any of these people. I'm sure they're great at their jobs. I'm not looking to disrespect them in any way, but none of us would have known Ed Rice had left the club because he wasn't a decision maker or a department head. He was just a normal guy in a job who got a promotion at Glamorgan. He got an opportunity to take a step up in his career to go to Glamorgan. And people are using this as a reason to have tantrums. As you've mentioned before we went live on the mics, Matt Scammell left the club as he was the commercial director. He joined in June 2020, was there till December 2021. He'd been at United for years, came to us, was there a year and 7 months, and left to go and become Chief Commercial Officer of Formula E. Do you, off the top of your head, know who the current commercial director is?
I should do, but I couldn't tell you.
It's Ben Latty is the gentleman's name.
Right.
Who was with Liverpool, to give his career rundown, he started off with Chelsea, was sales and marketing coordinator for a year, spent 5 years at Fulham in different sales roles, was the global marketing partnerships manager for the NBA for over a year, joined Liverpool, was with us from 2013 to 2021, when he left to become the group commercial director of Bristol Sport, who I think are the Bristol rugby team. And he joined us again as commercial director in May of last year. And none of us had heard about it. Unless you were paying uber close attention. You hadn't heard his name. So when people start throwing the toys because the partnerships manager, but he wasn't the partnerships manager. He was a partnerships manager at the club because we have 5 others. So people having these tantrums, we saw it the same with the club doctor leaving, or and not being replaced straight away. Well, the club doctor left right at the end of the summer and left us in a bind. It takes time to find somebody qualified to be the club doctor at a club. But the club doctor is not in charge of preventing injuries. And I saw loads of people having major tantrums. Oh, there's no club doctor. There's no club doctor. This is why we're having all these injuries. They've got nothing to do with injury prevention. You don't go to your doctor before you get sick. You go after you get sick. It's the same thing at the club. I'm trying to use examples of people that were there before and, well, they've done loads of work with injury prevention. No, they haven't. They wrote a couple of papers. Shut up. The club doctor does not oversee injury prevention. The sports scientists do. That's their department. So, when we see these players leave, or these people leave, just take a step back and consider, had you heard their name before? And if not, then it's likely not going to make a huge difference to how your day goes.
But such is social media. Always like to make mountains out of molehills. But right, okay. So one more topic before we conclude this, Dave, and that is to do with one of our favourite times of the year, the transfer window. So we've got another one coming up, starting in less than a fortnight now as we record this. With the January transfer window, and there have been strong links with 2 players certainly one of the players for a number of months, but another player, very strong links emerging in the last few days. So the players I'm talking about obviously are Jude Bellingham and Enzo Fernández, and 2 of the most sought after, highly rated young midfielders in world football. Now, the cost to bring them in would be quite significant. Obviously, one would cost more than the other, in all likelihood. Jude Bellingham is not likely to go for much less than £100 million, including add-ons. Whereas we know that, or it's reported at least, that Enzo Fernández has a release clause of 120 million euros if we wanted to prize him away from Benfica. Though I'd suspect that, certainly there would be room for negotiation with Benfica, and the actual final agreed sale fee would be comfortably less than that release clause figure, though obviously there will be a lot of interest in that player too. So, first of all, we do know that those players are exceptional. But one of the things I put out this week, Dave, on Twitter, was a thread just to explain that, in my view, affording both players is possible. I've pointed out that not long ago, in 2018, 19 and 20, the club spent £450 million towards payments, towards transfer fee instalments. So as is common practice, transfer fees are not all paid in one single lump sum. They sometimes are, but they are very much the exception rather than the norm. But 450 million was spent. Now, to put it into greater context, though, during that period, the club did bring in 250 million in receipts from transfer deals, most notably the one for Felipe Coutinho. So that still meant that the club had to spend 200 million from club revenue towards financing those deals. And what I said is that even if both deals were done for around just over 200 million pounds, because there's a possibility of spreading those payments over, say, 3 installments, your first installment might only be, say, 80 million pounds, and then the remaining 2 might be around 60 million. So that is how I explain that. Look, in the past we've had, even as recently as 2019, 175 million of spend on transfer fee installments. So to cover the cost of 80 million for those 2 players would, in my view, be achievable. Now, granted, there are other deals that have yet to be paid off. I think Jota has one final instalment due in July 2023. We also have instalments due for Diaz and Konate too. But compared to like Manchester United, who this week it has been reported their transfer debt is 307 million, Liverpool's transfer debt is significantly below that now, largely because there hasn't been a great deal of spend over the last few years. So, Dave, do you agree that it is feasible, or do you have a different view?
No, I think it's entirely feasible, but I think the Jota deal has longer to go, because if I remember correctly, we agreed to pay more than Wolves were looking for, to pay a very small amount up front. I think we only paid about 4 or 5 million up front for him, and I thought that one was spread over 5 years. I know the amortization is 5 years, but I thought we were paying the fee over 5 years as well. I'm happy to be wrong on that, but I do think you could go to Benfica and Dortmund and say, look, we are happy to pay your asking price. We'll even pay a little bit more than your asking price if we can spread that deal out over a longer period of time. So rather than 3 years, maybe you do it over 4 years, or you do it over 5 years, because these are very young players. Jude Bellingham will be 20 next summer. Not till June does he turn 20. Enzo turns 22 in January. So in 5 years, when you've paid Enzo off, he's only 27. He's in his prime. And if at that point he wants to go experience something else at Real Madrid or somewhere, well, then that's fine. You'll sell him on, you'll make a profit. The same thing goes for Jude. You could pay Jude off by the time he's 25. And then when he's 27, if he wanted to go and do something, somewhere else, you'll make a huge profit. So I definitely think it's absolutely feasible. Like, people get caught up in the fee and forget that you don't pay it all in one lump sum. Now, we paid a large chunk of the Darwin money in one lump sum. Like, we paid, I believe, close to 45 million in one lump sum to get Darwin. But that's what Benfica were looking for at the time. Benfica's financial situation seems to have improved a little bit since last summer, and I think they'd be willing to do an Enzo deal over 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. I think Dortmund would be willing to do the same over on a deal for Jude Bellingham if they're getting their asking price. Now, like you said, Enzo has a release clause. It's different to a buyout clause. And I've seen some people say, well, we can't do that because you'd have to pay it all up in one lump sum. No, that's a buyout clause. So on a buyout clause, basically what happens is we would give the money. So let's take the most notable example of a buyout clause in football history is Neymar. Yeah. So Neymar had a £198 million buyout clause in his Barcelona contract.
Yeah.
PSG gave Neymar 198 million, and then he gave that money to Barcelona. That's basically how that works on a buyout. It's the same thing when Chelsea bought Kepa. They gave Kepa 72 million pounds. Kepa then gave that money to Barcelona or to Athletic Bilbao. That's how that works. A release clause is different. You can negotiate the terms on a release clause. You can negotiate a payment structure on a release clause. We used a release clause on Ibrahima Konate, not a buyout clause. So we didn't pay for Ibu in one lump. We paid for him over 3 years. And I believe we might have even paid a couple of million, literally a couple, 1 or 2 million more to Leipzig to structure a deal that was favourable to us. And I believe we could do the same for Enzo. So if I'm right in thinking 120 million euro right now is about 103 million Great British pounds.
Yeah.
If we were to say to them, we will give you 107 million pounds.
I don't need a VPN. I've got nothing to hide. This is what I used to tell myself before I hooked up with LibertyShield.com. Not only is my home internet now fully encrypted, but I can now access all the websites I want, whenever I want, and do so from absolutely anywhere. As a Liverpool fan, I love to know I can now watch every match, regardless of whether it's on UK TV or not. My Liberty Shield VPN makes sure nothing is blocked and guarantees me super fast streaming speed throughout that match. You can get connected right now with their software package, which includes a 48-hour no-obligation free trial and instant access to their apps for Apple, Android, Fire TV, PC, Mac, and Android TV. Or go a step further like I have and get one of their pre-configured VPN routers. These small but powerful devices allow you to easily connect every device in your home to VPN, making it the perfect solution for smart TVs, mag boxes, and games consoles. Visit LibertyShield.com today and use coupon code AIVPN25 to get 25% off at checkout.
But we want this deal to go over 4 years. So we will pay you 25 million a year, either each summer, or we can do, each transfer window. So each January we could give you 12 and a half, each summer 12, whatever. We will give you a little bit extra to get this deal done. Then, you could do it over 4 years, 25 million up front, 25 million next summer, the summer after that, and then go to Dortmund and say, we're happy to pay 110 million, say, for Jude. We want to do it over 4 years. Here's 27.5 million. The other thing you could do is you could say to Benfica, we'll give you the bit extra, but we want a lower upfront payment. And you go to Dortmund and say, we'll give you a little bit less, but we'll give you a bigger upfront payment. So you could give Dortmund, say, 40 million in year one, Benfica 20 million in year one. The following year, you give Benfica a bigger fee, you give Dortmund a smaller fee. You can manipulate the finances of it so that it all fits within your budget, and both selling clubs are happy with the deals that they get, and the buying club obviously is happy because they're not having that extortionate initial outlay, and they're getting the players they want. And if we were to sign Enzo and Jude, that is transformative to our team. That's Virgil and Alisson 2.0. Now, obviously, as I've said before, we need 3 midfielders this summer. Between January and the summer, we need 3. We need 1 in each position, right side, holding midfield, and left side. We need a starter on the right side, a future starter, but more a player who can develop and become that starter in the middle role. And on the left side, you're looking for somebody to rotate with Thiago, probably take on more of the game time than Thiago, so you can manage Thiago out. So I was looking at this the other day, Mo, and I mentioned this to Carl. It's something I was going to write for the website, but it's easier to talk about it. So I was thinking, if we were to sign, let's say we go this month and we sign Manuel Ugarte from Sporting Lisbon, right? Holding midfielder, 21 years of age, huge potential. Sporting will probably want about 35 million for him. So he comes in to be Fabinho's backup. You could also play him as that more defensive 8 with Fabinho. But say primarily he's the backup 6. And then in the summer we go and we get Jude and we get Enzo. So for the right-sided role, we would have Jude as the starter. Let's say we play 60 games a season. Jude is the starter. Yeah. Jude is going to start 45 games a season, and then he'll be available as a sub in the rest. And Henderson, who will continue to have a role as club captain, he gets 15 starts. They're cup games, they're dead rubbers in the Champions League, lesser games in the Premier League, but also he gets a lot of sub appearances. Then we take Curtis Jones and we loan him for a year, and we say, you go and develop, and when you come back, you're going to take Henderson's role. And then when he takes that role in 2024, he gets a greater share of the minutes than Henderson would, which means you can be more careful in managing Jude. So you end up with Jude and Curtis as your long-term pair, but Jude and Henderson as your short-term pair. In the holding midfield role, let's say Fabinho gets 35 starts and Ugarte gets 25 starts. And over the next 2 years, that swaps, and that allows us to develop Bajcetic, and he eventually usurps Fabinho in 3 years maybe, and he becomes the backup / competition for Ugarte. And in the left-sided role, let's say Enzo starts 40 and Thiago starts 20. You loan Tyler Morton out for another year or two. You extend Thiago's contract, because why wouldn't you? There's no reason he can't play till 35, 36. Look at Luka Modric. If you manage him properly, you can get him to 36 and get greatness out of him until then. But it's Enzo and Thiago, and then if Morton develops the right way, or if somebody else comes along and develops in that role, maybe Bobby Clark develops in that role. Maybe that's where he ends up, because we saw the passing yesterday. Then all of a sudden, with 3 buys for this year, you could basically have sorted your midfield for the next 8 years by using these 3, the academy youngsters that we have, and the existing starters that we have. So it is a big outlay. You're talking, say, 245 million for 3 players. But then you don't really need to address that midfield for a long, long time. If a player pops up that you think, oh, he's a must-buy, you can go and get him. But it's no longer a thing where every summer you're thinking, geez, our midfield is old, our midfield is broken down. You've got 3 young stud midfielders, 3 experienced veterans, 2 of whom are still of a very high quality, and then 3 young midfielders in Jones, Bajcetic, and Morton, who might well develop into really good squad players. And if they don't, you just sell them on and you can bring others in. But this one big outlay would mean that area of the team is settled for the long term, and you don't need to address it again.
Yeah, that's right. And then I suppose the only other question really is, so if Bobby doesn't extend his contract and in the next several weeks agrees to a pre-agreement for a club overseas, we potentially do need to bring in another forward.
And that's where I'd be looking at someone like a Marcus Thuram. He's not the most refined player, but he's big, powerful, quick, talented, versatile, and he's out of contract in the summer. So his wages won't be obscene. We talked about him on the transfer committee pod. He's probably only on, I'm not sure what you estimated, 25 or so at the moment. Yes. So I think he might take 60, 65, which is about a third of what Bobby currently earns. So if you take him replacing Bobby, And maybe you still have to look at maybe bringing in. So what you would have then is you'd have Mo and Harvey as the right-sided options, and Ben Doak for cup appearances. You'd have Darwin and Thuram and Cade Gordon for the middle role, and then Diaz, Jota, and then Frauendorf and Musalowski for the left-sided role. And obviously Jota can play centrally as well, and he can play on the right. So he could be, you could look at Jota as he's actually the fourth forward, and he's the primary backup in all three roles. Thuram is the fifth forward. He's the next up in all three roles, and Harvey can play obviously some midfield minutes if needed as well. But someone like a Thuram would make a lot of sense because his wages, even with what you'd imagine, let's say he comes in on 70 grand, let's say 60 grand a week, right? On a 5-year deal, that's about 15 million. Plus he gets a signing bonus, which by general terms is a year's wage up front. So it's basically a 6-year deal paid in 5 years. And it's 18 million. But the wage savings on Bobby, like if you keep Bobby around, he's not going to take a big pay cut, I don't believe. He's on about 9 million a year now. So 2 years of Bobby is 18 million.
Yeah.
And he'd probably get a signing bonus as well. So re-signing Bobby for 2 years would probably be more expensive than signing Thuram for 5 years. And if Thuram wants to leave in a couple of years, he'll have really good resale value, whereas Bobby will have no value. None at all. In the same way, if we put Henderson on the market tomorrow, he's got no value. You're not getting anything for Henderson. Whatever fee you get, you're going to have to give him to make up the difference in wages. Like if Leicester said, we want Henderson, we'll give you 10 or 15 million. Okay, well, we're paying Henderson 20 million over next season, the season after. How much are you going to pay him? Oh, well, we're going to pay him 100 grand a week. Right, so there's a 10 million difference. So the fee that you're giving us, we're now giving him to make up the difference in wages. So it makes sense to let Bobby leave, bring in a Thuram, help develop those young players, or give more opportunities to those young players. And look, come next summer, 2024, then if you want to go and bring in another expensive forward, then you're going to be in a better position to do so because you've already addressed the midfield. Your defence will need a little bit of attention come 2024 because Matip will have aged out. But in defence, you do have sellable assets in Joe Gomez and Costa Simicas. So the defence could actually be done this summer and pay for itself, whereas the midfield and forward line can't be. They're going to need investment.
Yeah, totally. And, that's why, though some fans feel that the only way to deal with this is to bring in significant outside investment, based on club revenues as they currently are, there's still significant amount of business that is absolutely feasible.
And look, we know that last summer the plan was Tchouaméni and Darwin. It wasn't one or the other. Some people have it in their minds that we only bought Darwin because the Tchouaméni deal didn't happen. That's not the case at all. The Tchouaméni money is sitting there. The plan for last summer was Tchouaméni and Darwin and then Jude for 2023. That was the grand plan.
Yes.
We got Darwin. We may well get Jude, but the Tchouaméni money is still sitting there. Now, he wouldn't have been as expensive as Enzo, but I'd imagine the upfront fee, which is all that would be sitting there, is what was to be paid upfront, was probably about the same.
Yeah, and you're right. The funds are there. They weren't spent. They absolutely were intended to be spent, and that is what can be used to get some business done in January. And not all reports. I mean, James Pearce is suggesting that the club won't be doing much, if anything, but others have suggested otherwise. And there's clearly a need to do some business in January because the stakes are too big ultimately, aren't they, Dave? If we sit still and don't do anything in January and we let top four slip, that alone, in terms of just the TV money from the Champions League, compared to Europa or worse, is probably in the region of 50 to 60 million. That's not even to mention the impact on commercial and match day.
Plus, if you end up in the Europa League, you're not just screwing this season, you're screwing next season as well. You're not winning a Premier League title while trying to compete in the Europa League.
No chance, yeah.
So you're better off to miss Europe altogether if you don't get top four. Now, I wouldn't. My own personal thoughts on James Jimbo Pearce are well known and documented, so I won't say anything on this podcast. But there are three Liverpool journalists who, in my view, are worth listening to. One is Paul Joyce, who doesn't really say anything at all anyway, and the other two are the younger two. They're David Lynch and Neil Jones. Both of whom are significantly better connected at the club than Jimbo is. And neither of them have shot down. Both of them have been asked, and neither of them have shot down the potential of signing Enzo and Jude. And if they're not shooting it down, but they're urging caution as is their job. If they're not shooting it down, I think they've been told this is a real possibility. David Lynch is it baffles me. Like I've had issues with him in the past, but he's a very good journalist. I don't understand how David Lynch is not employed by one of the main national newspapers to cover the club. I really don't understand how that's the case, because he used to work for the club. He is really well connected at the club, and him and Neil Jones, to me, are the two most honest of these journalists as well. I don't look at anybody other than, obviously Ornstein is a different case because he's a national reporter. But when it comes to the club, it's Joyce, it's Lynch, and it's Jones, and nobody else is worth listening to. Melissa Reddy doesn't cover Liverpool anymore. Before anyone says her name, she works for Sky as a national correspondent and does very little on Liverpool anymore. Andy Hunter, you never hear his name anymore. He spends more time covering the Ev. Bascombe, I mean, Bascombe had great contacts back in the day. Doesn't say a whole lot now. He's very, very quiet. Dominic King works for the Daily Mail, and frankly, anyone that works for or is associated with the Daily Mail or any of the journalists can take a very long walk off a very short plank, as far as I'm concerned. They're one step removed from the Sun. So when the two lads, Lynch wrote about it and Jones spoke about it, neither of them ruled it out. They said it's tough to do, which obviously would be because it's two big deals, but it's definitely something that's there and that's doable. That's a real thing. And the journalists who are reporting it from Portugal and from Argentina, I'm told, are quite good. They're not the type who'd say it unless there was real traction to it regards to Enzo.
Yeah. They certainly don't come across as Romano wannabes. Let's put it that way.
No, definitely not. They're not Ben Jacobs or something like that. And obviously, look, we know with Jude, it's been so widely talked about that Jude is something we're definitely working on. Everybody knows that. I wouldn't believe anything that comes out of Christian Falk's mouth either, but I do think he probably is on the right track with his statement that Jude's parents are kind of pushing him towards Liverpool. And based on what Jude has said, and obviously we saw Agent Henderson and Agent Trent putting in the graft in Qatar, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if we landed both. It really wouldn't.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been a while since we did big business, but we have done it in the past, and there's clubs around us who have generated significantly less revenue, who've gone out and spent big, and we have the funds, we have the means, and I covered that on Twitter this past week, and I absolutely believe that even without bringing outside investment in, we can get some very significant business done. And
the other thing, before we go, the other thing I just wanted to mention is this idea that FSG, if they're still the owners and we miss out on top four, that means we'll spend nothing. And I disagree, because I think if you look at the track record of American owners, the Glazers and the Cronkies at Arsenal, it's when they're out of top four that they've spent, because the goal is to get back into top four, because the Champions League is where the real money is. And if we consider that in the summer of 2023, we might be out of European Cup football.
Yeah.
Looking at Arsenal probably in, City definitely in.
Yeah.
Spurs probably in, and maybe United in, and then maybe Chelsea and Newcastle spending heavily. I think they'd have to spend, or they would. That would be it. It would be over. You would have no choice. If we miss out, I don't think these deals hinge on getting top four. Is my honest view of it. I think they can be done. And I think the want from our side will be there to do them, even without top four. The question would be, though, is Jude Bellingham or Enzo Fernández willing to join a Europa League team?
Well,
and they become harder deals to do.
Yeah.
But I think, to be fair, they become even more important deals to do.
They do, but then, as we've seen over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, there have been some very big name players who have joined, your Man Uniteds, your Chelseas, your Arsenals, when they have fallen out of the top four and had to go into the Europa League. Like Rafael Varane, multiple-time Champions League winner, happy to join United, even though they'd slipped into the Europa League for this season. And, likewise, we've seen with other players that have joined Chelsea, for example, when, they've slipped out of the top four on 2 or 3 occasions over the last, 7, 8 years. And yet they've still managed to get some, big business done too. So it's certainly not the end of the world. And I think that, especially, I wouldn't know about Enzo, but certainly Jude and his family seem to be the types who are a bit more measured and look at things longer term. And even if Liverpool did miss out on top four, I don't think that necessarily put them off the club. I think they'd see that, okay, yes, it has been a blip, but it is a blip, and Liverpool should, with Jude joining, stand a good chance of getting back in the top four and potentially challenge for the title again with 1 or 2 other bits of inspired business on top of that. So
exactly, exactly.
Great, excellent, Dave. So we've gone for quite some time. We've been around the houses and then been around the houses again, but we've covered an immense amount there, covering all business aspects of the club in terms of ownership and transfer dealings and all other matters beside. So really, really thank you for your time in joining me on the podcast. Is there anything you'd like to plug before you go?
Daily Red will be returning. The World Cup is pretty much over. It'll be back, and then obviously Two-Footed every day. There'll be the return of post-match Raw. Scouted will continue to roll along, and at some point I will nail down Downey to do On the Books, and I'll nail down Tandon to do an old school. And coming in January is the relaunch of the Buzz podcast, so moving away from the football sphere a little bit. We'll be looking at TV shows, movies, having different guests on to discuss, old movies, old TV shows, and obviously whatever the hottest thing going is right now. So yeah, that's to come in January. So that's one I think to be excited about. And there might be something else coming on Anfield Index. It's a bit of a secret at the minute, so I'll just keep that one under wraps.
Oh, we all like secrets, so look forward to hearing about that one as well then, Dave. But this will be probably my last time on Anfield Index for this year. I'm not going before anyone gets too excited. So as Anfield Index's resident part-timer, I'll be back at some point in the new year. So for those celebrating, have a very lovely Christmas and a very enjoyable new year.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.